The Brain of Morbius. This four-part serial from 1976 sees the Doctor and Sarah forced to land on the desolate planet of Khan, home to a sinister sisterhood and the fanatical surgeon Dr. Solon. Solon is a follower of Morbius, a crazed renegade Time Lord who was executed for his crimes. But not all of Morbius is dead and buried. This troubled story was the end result of a massive rewrite of an original script from Who writer and former script editor Terrance Dicks. Always intended to be something of a parody of the Mary Shelley horror classic Frankenstein, Dicks' initial intention was to write a story about a robot attempting to reassemble a man. The robot would little understanding of aesthetics and thus come up with a monstrous final form. Having delivered the scripts, Dicks went on holiday, only for producer Philip Hinchcliffe and current script editor Robert Holmes to decide they didn't actually like the idea after all and do a major rewrite, making the story back into a more traditional Frankenstein story. Thus the mindless robot became Dr. Solon. Alas, as Dicks is mockingly keen to point out to this day, this change basically renders the rest of the story utterly ludicrous. That Solon, this apparently great surgeon, is unable to come up with no better body for his beloved Morbius than a mishmash of hideous proportions. The idea that Solon wants the Doctor's head to put Morbius' brain in and stick it on his already assembled gruesome body, instead of just sticking Morbius' brain into his head, and thus have his already normal body, makes no sense at all, and is impossible to find any justification for. Nonetheless, despite this enormous plot hole, The Brain of Morbius is still a, frankly inexplicably, popular story with the majority of Doctor Who fans, although I find it somewhat difficult to understand why. Certainly, the gothic horror feel of the story is a popular one, as is the rest of this era and the Doctor, companion team of Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen and, yes, Philip Murdoch does give a fine performance as the evil surgeon. Yet the story is actually very poorly made, cheap-looking even by the usual standards of classic Who. The sisterhood characters are poor and irritating to the extent that you want Solon to come and massacre the lot of them, and even the regulars are not up to their normal standards, particularly Elizabeth Sladen as Sarah, whose performance when temporarily blinded by the sisterhood is mannered, hammy and unconvincing to put it mildly. The climactic battle between the Doctor and Morbius is badly written, a number of the special effects are appalling, notably Morbius' hilariously badly realized fall off the cliff, and even the costume for the monstrous final form of Morbius is silly rather than horrific. There are indeed some fans who do not like the story at all for the very reasons mentioned above, and it is rather difficult to comprehend why The Brain of Morbius has the generally positive reputation that it does. Personally, I find it both boring and extraordinarily silly, without actually being funny, and would rather do something more interesting with my time instead, like watching paint dry.